Welcome back to Switched to Linux, and we have a return, not a long-time permanent return, mind you, but a return of an old favorite series of everybody, DistroWars. We are going to be looking at Ubuntu Cinnamon, just released in the new 23.04 release, and compare this to the latest edition of Linux Mint Cinnamon 21.1. Why are we going to do this? Well, because, that one guy did the article saying, this is the end of Linux Mint. Very clickbaity article that I did a very clickbaity video about, and ended up being like, search YouTube or search start page for end of Linux Mint. There you go, right there at the very top. Yes, taking my place, liking it. That is probably the most viral video I've done for a while. I think it's had some between 30 and 40,000 views now. But you can see the commentary, and I said in there that when Ubuntu Cinnamon, the official flavor, releases, I am going to do a review of it. Well, I decided instead of just doing a full-fledged review, we are going to go ahead and do a DistroWars. Linux Mint versus Ubuntu Cinnamon. And is Ubuntu Cinnamon really the end, the death of Linux Mint? So let's go ahead and have a brief look. First, head on over to their websites and see what we have. Linux Mint, the current version is 21.1. Of course, here's something that's going to be important because as of right this moment, the Cinnamon version in Ubuntu Cinnamon is a higher version than the Cinnamon version in Linux Mint. Of course, I have not updated. I just installed each of them. Now, why that's significant is Ubuntu Cinnamon just dropped a couple days ago, and Linux Mint 21.1 has been out for a little bit. So if I pushed all system updates on both of these distros, they might have the same version. I don't know specifically. I can tell you that the next Linux Mint 21.2 is going to have a brand new rendition of Cinnamon with a lot of cool fixes. We talked about all that on a previous video. Now, Linux Mint is really designed for maximum compatibility, which is something that we do not necessarily see as much in Ubuntu Cinnamon, as we will get to. Of course, when we have the downloads, we have a couple different options inside Linux Mint. We do have the Linux Mint Debian Edition, LMDE, if you hear that around. That is the same thing based on Linux Mint, simply based on Debian instead of Ubuntu. Their traditional is the Ubuntu-based, and we have 3 desktop environment options. We have the Cinnamon, which is the standard, and of course, of significance as well, the Linux Mint team are the creators, developers, and maintainers of the Cinnamon desktop environment. So when it comes to the best overall implementations, we generally expect them to do it the best. They also have a Mate and an XFCE edition. So you can grab these. Of course, they used to have KDE. It's controversial that they took it out. They took it out for very good reasons. It's had issues with compatibility. It didn't always work as well. But I will note that you can install nearly any desktop environment on top of this that you would like. We do have a very nice support forums and a lot of good user-friendly stuff that's not going to tell you to go RTFM. They're actually going to answer your questions most of the time. Now, moving on to the next, this is Ubuntu Cinnamon. Of course, Ubuntu Cinnamon is just now brand new, a official flavor of Ubuntu. Being an official flavor of Ubuntu now, this means that they have the official canonical stamp of approval, and it is on their official flavors list. And of course, because it's a flavor, they only have one desktop environment. Of course, that is Cinnamon. What, were you expecting it to be Mate or something? Come on. Go ahead and head on over to the download links. One of the things I did find is that the download link last night and even right now, you can't see the download link, but the download link on the website is not yet current. I actually had to grab the download link from the official Ubuntu lists rather than the website itself. So just keep that in mind. The website right now is slightly out of date on the day I'm doing this. Hopefully that will be up to date soon. Now, what this is going to feature, of course, is with the Ubuntu stamp of approval, they have to completely remove flat packs and add snaps into their system. So that is what you're going to see inside of here. We do have a very nice Cinnamon implementation, and from the screenshots, it looks nice. But, of course, our task here on DistroWars is to boot up each of these guys and see which is the better option, if one of these is the better option or not. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and head on over to the computer desktops and see what each of these guys look like when they are installed. All right, so landing on the login screen, we'll go ahead and log into Ubuntu Cinnamon here. And, of course, it says 2204 down there on the bottom. This is 2304. It should be anyway. Let's go ahead and pull up our system information and double check that guy. And this is going to give us the information. Of course, you can see it's 2304, so our initial login screen was a little out of date. Even that's out of date. Very interesting. So not as much attention paid to the overall details, but see we have Ubuntu 2304. Our Cinnamon version on this is 5.6.7. And we have the Linux kernel 6.2. Now, let's talk about our Linux kernels briefly, because one of the things that Linux Mint generally does is it intentionally uses an older kernel. The reason is 6.2 is so new, it is going to have a few bugs in it. It will have a few stability issues in it. And so that's why the Linux Mint team always goes back. Now, in some criticisms, the current Linux Mint ships with 5.15, which might be crazy out of date depending on what your idea is. The point is, though, is that Linux Mint in general is going to support a little bit more hardware because it is possible to drop older hardware support with newer kernels. So if one of these is not working for you, try the other one to get a similar overall feel. So the other thing that we are going to note before we get too far into here is the Ubuntu Cinnamon does seem to take more resources, probably related to the fact that it is jam-packed full of snap packages, and those are already up and running. Now, it's already running 1 gigabyte of memory. In my initial test, it was running 1.3. I did check it a little bit later. One thing to note, though, is that the system resources here does not seem to match some of the other theming. That is an issue that we do get inside of some of the implementations of Cinnamon, and something that the next version of Cinnamon might actually have slightly worse as they go for compatibility with the fact that people like to use different versions of things. So just keep that in mind, that if you're looking for something that everything 100% looks perfectly fluid throughout the operating system, you may not get that with Cinnamon at all. So booting up the terminal here, we can see that we already have a series of snap packages installed. We have Firefox is there. We have GNOME 42, of course, current version, and the version of GNOME shipping with current Ubuntu is 44. We have Core 22, and we have a few other things in there. You'll notice that the Snap Store is not installed. For software, they're actually using the GNOME Store, and it is actually GNOME Store from 44. So we do have a patchwork of different versions of GNOME components throughout. Not exactly sure if that's going to cause a problem or if I'm just happen to be reading that wrong. The other thing I found is that I know that, for example, if we do a search for Kden Live, I thought there was a Snap version of that, but apparently there's not. If I go in here, we only have an Ubuntu version here from the deb repository. So that's kind of good. If we search up our simple screen recorder, for example, let's go ahead and do that. If I could spell recorder, of course. Then you'll see that you have a few different options in here. This is the unofficial from the Snap repositories. And we have this one is also the unofficial from the Snap repositories. And we have this one is from the official Ubuntu repository. So we do have a few issues. So you can see that Snap packages are working overall well with the GNOME Store. We do not necessarily need that software store inside of here. As far as our theming is concerned, one of the early criticisms I had of Ubuntu Cinnamon is it was too bright and the theming was ugly. I gotta say, they solved that. This theming is beautiful. It is spot on. I absolutely love it. And it really does a great job of capturing the Ubuntu colors and applying them well, evenly, and inside of how Cinnamon is really designed to work without being too bright in places and too dark in places. These guys have completely got those theming systems working. As far as backgrounds, I found that we do have a ton of different backgrounds, and a lot of them are weird and generic, and some of them are just like Debian backgrounds. So the backgrounds themselves are very mix and match with a lot of different things. I found very few really amazing and beautiful different pictures. I guess the closest we have is the few inside of Lunar. So we do have some old Ubuntu Cinnamon wallpapers in here, which are pretty nice as well. But overall, the wallpapers are kind of a mixed bag overall. Not a real big deal at all, obviously. A lot of people are just going to use your own wallpapers. They do suffer with the same problem Linux Mint has, only not giving us enough mouse pointers. They do give us enough themes, but not an overwhelming amount. We can go light theme, dark theme, and a variety of different coloration options here, utilizing it entirely based on the Yarrow Ubuntu theme. This is something that the next version of Linux Mint is going to implement as well, but you can see that these guys did it really well. It really matches that theming of Ubuntu and gives us this Ubuntu feel while still being on a Cinnamon desktop. We do have the boring old Cinnamon desktop based on Linux Mint, and then we have a couple of Yarrow, a Yarrow Cinnamon and Yarrow Cinnamon Dark. Not an overwhelming amount of theming options, probably a little bit better. We did not have any form of welcome screen, however, so there's no real way to easily set up your panel. If you like the older style panel, you're kind of out of luck, or you can follow my video to learn how to set up your panels better, or maybe more to your liking, whereas Linux Mint has that in there. We don't have an easy way to change our kernels. All of our updates are managed inside of the GNOME software store, which I don't really particularly care for, but I think that might be more of a personal preference. Obviously, because this is an official flavor now, Flatpak is completely missing. We can still install it. Once we'd install it, we would have to manually add the FlatHub repositories or whatever Flatpak repositories you'd like to use. But overall, they've done a pretty good job with it. They have given us a good implementation of Cinnamon on a current version of the Cinnamon desktop with the current version of a kernel. They've given us an overall stable desktop that is not really difficult to work with. Overall, they have done a really good job. We are lacking, though, some of the system tools that you do get inside of Linux Mint, USB writers, and a few of the other really good tools that Linux Mint does give us. Am I the only geek that likes the character map? I actually do use it. Call me a geek, whatever else. We do have a few games. That's something that we don't have on Linux Mint by default, but I don't know. I might want to waste some time and install Sudoku. Why not? We do have a good suite of other software. Of course, we do have the minimal and the full install. This one actually departs from the regular Ubuntu, and then it does give us pretty much the whole suite, at least almost the whole suite. Databasing is missing, but it does give us the math tools, which I believe are missing from the Ubuntu core. I could be wrong about that, but I think they are. We do have Celluloid, Rhythmbox, and some basic administration. Overall, though, there's not a ton of the extra tools that we have. And I will also note that the installer used with Ubuntu Cinnamon is still the old installer. Of course, the new version of Ubuntu rolled out a brand new, really nice, really amazing, user-friendly installer, and this version does not yet use it. In fact, this and Linux Mint do use the exact same installer. So with that as our look at Ubuntu Cinnamon, let's go ahead and see how Linux Mint compares. All right, so we'll get logged in here on our Cinnamon desktop. And as we get logged in over here, the first thing that we have being greeted with us on Linux Mint is a welcome screen. This is a really good thing because it highlights a lot of the functions and the features that we don't get necessarily inside of Ubuntu Cinnamon. Of course, the first is, do we want to choose the light or the dark theme, and you want to choose your highlight color. Now, the next version of Linux Mint is going to not embed the colors only inside of the welcome screen. It's going to actually include that inside of the app. That will eventually also roll out to Ubuntu Cinnamon. Just to know, as of right now, the only way to change this is to go into your menu and reboot your welcome screen and change your highlights and your colors here. But you can choose what you want from here and go ahead and move on. We're just going to go ahead and stick with the layouts. We also, though, have the choice between the modern and the traditional panel. I like the function of the traditional panel. I like the view of the modern panel. I can use this and then just do some panel edits and make this bigger, make it look a little bit more modern. Or what I usually do is go into the modern and I just tweak this function to do how I want it to do. I like that Linux Mint gives us the option here, recognizing that some people do not want the change forced upon us. Ubuntu Cinnamon forces the change. This does highlight the system snapshots, the driver manager, the update manager, the system settings, and things like that. The other thing that Linux Mint has that Ubuntu Cinnamon does not is we have the notification status window. This is going to give us any issues of system reports. It's going to check, have we set up backups? We have language pack information, and if you need anything, you can copy this text. So if you're doing some bug report, you're asking somebody in a forum, they're like, well, give us all this kind of stuff. You're like, you can just go ahead and copy this and paste it right on into your system. So that is what we have as far as the functionality. Before we get too far in, let's also go ahead and look at our system info just to see what we have. So you can see we have a slightly older version of Cinnamon. We will check, though, if we have the newer version available to us. As I said, I just installed this. I did not run any updates, and this has been out for a few months versus Cinnamon. Ubuntu Cinnamon was out for just a day. You can see that we have an older Linux kernel 5.15, and I did check in Linux Mint, you do have the option to easily change the kernel updates, and as you do that, you can only go up to 5.19 without doing a little bit more complicated things. Yes, you can get the latest kernel on this. It's just not as easy to do right from inside of here. And also, before we go too much further, just to make sure we're comparing them both around the same time, is we have our system monitor. You can see that we are running under 900 megabytes, meaning that Linux Mint is going to be a little bit leaner of a system. You will notice that this does actually have that same theming issue, so some of the applications don't have the theming quite as right, although this one does match our Cinnamon view a little bit better. It's just still not perfect because welcome to Linux. Of course, there are no snaps involved here, and of course on Linux Mint Cinnamon you have to do a very specific system override in order to install snaps. Why do they do that? Why is it easier to install Flatpak on Ubuntu Cinnamon than it is to install Snap on Linux Mint Cinnamon? The reason is Snap does go against the open source philosophy, and Linux Mint wanted to have a protection from any application automatically installing Snap without your consent. That's why they made it a little bit harder. We do have Flatpaks, though, but unlike Ubuntu, they do not give us Flatpaks out of the box. They just give us support for them so we can work them if we want to. Of course, on Linux Mint, we do have a separate separate update manager, which will manage all of the system updates versus managing the updates and all of the software from the same place. I do like the way that Linux Mint separates those out. We are going to push this update just to see if we do have the latest update. This is just the update to the manager itself. Then this is going to show us all of the other system updates available. I just want to see if we do have the option to update that Cinnamon up. We have our Linux firmware update. What's that going up to? All right, and let's see if we see Cinnamon in here anyway. Oh, I saw Cinnamon. There you go. So yeah, this will actually, if we push our system updates, we will actually have a newer version of Cinnamon on this. So it's not completely accurate to say Linux Mint Cinnamon 21.1 does have an older version of Cinnamon. It's just I've not pushed the updates. So there we have it. That guy is going to work. The software itself is going to be managed inside of the Linux Mint software manager. I like the software manager quite a bit better, especially in the more recent tweaks that they did, where we have our flat packs in a separate location than the rest of our repositories, and we can see. Now, you can see it says generating cache one moment. It looks like this is lasting longer. Just note, I did not boot this up in my initial testing, whereas I did boot up the software manager on Ubuntu. So this is the first time you boot it up, it will take a little bit longer based on your internet speed and a few other things like that. While that is going and updating itself, let's go ahead and have a brief look at our system settings, which are going to be mostly the same. Of course, I'm going to highlight our backgrounds since we looked at that. We have a much cleaner backgrounds, fewer folders, and a lot more beautiful backgrounds to pick from. This is something that Linux Mint has always done really well in giving us some really nice, really good backgrounds. The other thing we're going to highlight is the themes. Of course, the next version of Cinnamon is going to have another tab up here to manage all of your different theme settings. And a good criticism of some people in the past giving us more cursors. It looks like we do have them now. So we do have these new modern cursors they gave us. We can go back to some of the older ones. So we do have good options there. One thing we have too many options of is, holy crap, maybe it's about time Linux Mint starts cleaning some of these guys out. Maybe we need to isolate some of these out and on install say, hey, do you want the old legacy theming options? Because we do have way too many theming options as far as our folders. Here's, of course, the same Yarrow folders that we have inside of Cinnamon. We do have these stripy folders here are the new ones. These are going away in the next release because overall the community did not respond well to them, although I believe you can get them if you really want them. Overall, though, it is a criticism to suggest there are way too many theming options, but I believe that they'll actually be paring that down in the next release because we'll have an extra setting which will manage all of the theming and get you the good light, dark, and mixed balances, removing some of these, only seeing these when you have the when you want to see the custom theming options. Although if they're all installed, that means a bigger distro download without the overall options. So that is kind of annoying. All right, let's go ahead and come on over here. Let's hit Kden Live, which is what I always do a brief search for, and you'll see that we have a couple of options. This one is coming from the Flatpak. This one is coming from the Linux Mint repositories. So I really love the fact that you can see right in here without having to click on it and see what your options are. And you do actually have the option to go back and forth between them. They are cross-referenced within themselves. So let's have a look at our simple screen recorder, one of the things that we looked at before. So let's do simple screen recorder. And we will see in here that with simple screen recorder, we have this is your main one, and then this one is X11 and OpenGL, X11 OpenGL. This one's going to have a few other options, it looks like, just some extra libraries and things in there. So we do have some good options there. Of course, you can see from all the different software, once you click in on it, what is the specific source of it. Down here, you can see this is a system package. We also have a Flatpak option of it. So these are all different things that we have. As far as other software is concerned, of course, we do have the USB stick writers in Linux Mint, something we do not have in Ubuntu Cinnamon. And we do have, of course, my coveted character map because, yes, I'm a geek and I do use it. So we do have a few extra tools on here as well, meaning that Linux Mint does feel like a little bit more of a full software suite. We have the web applications, something that we don't have there. We do have databasing involved over here. We have the H word that we got a channel suspension for talking about one time, so we're not going to say any more about that. We also, though, have Warpinator, which is a good network-based file sharer. All things that Linux Mint gives us. So overall, is Linux Mint going to be the overall, it's dead now because Ubuntu Cinnamon is out? Absolutely not. Overall, what we're going to see here is that the two distributions are good. Neither one of them is just absolutely horrible. They are good running up next to each other. If you're talking about just wanting to have the good Cinnamon desktop environment, which one does it better? I generally think the person who develops it probably does it a little bit better. And with as far as the Cinnamon itself, overall, they're both about the same. That's fine. Where I think that Linux Mint stands out a little bit better is it feels like a more of a full operating system, giving us a little bit more tools, a few other options. It isolates the system updates from our software package installers. It does extra things, highlighting the system snapshots, highlighting the backup tools, highlighting a lot of the extra features and functions that we have. Overall, Linux Mint is still a good contender here. They give us good software with flat packs without forcing snaps on us. Overall, it's a little bit slower, probably because of the full implementation, install, and running of snap packages on the Ubuntu core, which is going to slow things down, add more loop directories, and all sorts of other weird stuff in the file system, making Linux Mint probably the better choice, but not by much. We have to praise the Ubuntu Cinnamon team. They did a really good job of getting that theming completely spot on. They gave us a very up-to-date system. They gave us a system that certainly gave me less bugs than the regular Ubuntu did. And frankly, if you had to force me to use some Ubuntu flavor, I'd probably go to that, if not the Ubuntu Budgie, because I think Budgie is also a very good, competent desktop out of the box. So overall, they're both very good. I'm going to give Linux Mint a slight head up. Maybe that's biased, the fact that I like Linux Mint so much, but let me know what you think about these two distributions in the comments down below. Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.